I need to check the used names file and then write the story. The band names are Marvin, Carol, Derek, Glenn, Wayne, Nathan, Sylvia, Renee, Curtis, Patricia, Theodore, Barbara, Lawrence, Frank, Raymond, Elaine, Joel, Douglas, Scott, Diane, Owen, Hannah, Terrence, Beverly, Vivian, Garrett, Dorothy, Renata, Gerald, Russell, Earl, Madison, Caleb, Leonard, Clifton, Jerome, Adrian, Serena, Philip, James, Kevin, Tanya, Franklin, Roy, Dale, Marcus, Irene, Preston, Noel, Lynette, Harold. Now I'll write the story with all new names. I still think about that cardboard box sometimes. The way it landed on the porch, the hollow thud it made against the wooden planks. My son-in-law dropped it there without saying a word. Just set it down, or more accurately, let it fall. And my daughter stood in the doorway behind him with her arms crossed like she was waiting for me to say something she could argue against. That was the morning everything I had built over 62 years of my life fit inside a box that had once held a microwave oven. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter as much as the story does, but people call me Uncle Marvin. Well, that's the channel. In real life, my name is Walter. Walter Eugene Odom. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a supervisor at a water treatment facility outside of Columbus, Ohio. I have 2 bad knees, 1 good ear, and more patience than God probably intended to give a man. I also have a daughter. Her name is Suzanne. Suzanne was the kind of child who made you feel like you did something right, smart, careful. She used to organize her school supplies by color and alphabetize her bookshelf when she was 9 years old. Her mother, my late wife Roberta, used to say Suzanne got her father's stubbornness and her mother's good sense, which meant she was going to be fine in life as long as nobody got to her first. Somebody got to her. His name is Craig. Craig Allen Whitfield. He came into Suzanne's life about 4 years after Roberta passed, and I want to be fair here. I want to tell this the way it actually happened and not the way I wish it had. When I first met Craig, I didn't dislike him. He shook my hand firm. He looked me in the eye. He said, "Yes, sir," and "No, sir," the way men used to when they were taught to. He had a job in commercial real estate, drove a clean car, wore a nice watch. Suzanne was 34 and I could see she was happy, and I figured, what right does an old man have to take that from his daughter? So I gave him a chance. I gave him more than that. When they got married 2 years later, I helped pay for the wedding. Not a little. Roberta had left behind a small life insurance policy, and I used a portion of it. $22,000. Because Suzanne wanted an outdoor ceremony with a tent and a live band and a photographer who, I'm told, was in high demand. I didn't flinch. Roberta would have wanted her daughter to have that day. After the wedding, they moved into an apartment not far from me. For a while, everything seemed fine. Craig's income went up and down the way real estate income does. Some months he was buying steaks. Other months, Suzanne was calling me asking if I could help with groceries, which I always did. I didn't keep score. That's not what family is for. Then Roberta's mother, my former mother-in-law, a woman named Agnes, who I had remained close to for 20-something years, passed away at 91. God rest her. She left behind a house, a paid-off, 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood in Westerville that she had owned since 1978. And because Roberta had predeceased her, that house passed to me through the estate. I won't go into all the legal particulars, but the short version is, I now owned a house worth, at the time of appraisal, just over $480,000. I want you to remember that number. I was still living in my own place, a smaller ranch house I'd owned for 20 years. I didn't need Agnes's house. I thought about selling it, putting the money away. But it was a good house, solid bones. And there was a part of me that felt like selling it too fast would be disrespectful to her memory. So I sat on the decision for a few months. That's when Craig started calling more. Not Suzanne, Craig. He'd call in the evenings, just to check in, he said. He'd ask how I was feeling, whether my knees were giving me trouble, whether I was eating right. It felt warm. It felt like concern. Looking back, what it felt like was a man doing research. One evening, he drove out to see me. Alone, without Suzanne, and he sat at my kitchen table and laid out what he called an opportunity. His idea was that I should move into Agnes's house with the two of them, not as a guest, as a family arrangement. He explained that the cost of living was going up, that Suzanne worried about me being alone, that it made practical sense for all three of us to share one roof. He had a way of making things sound like they were your idea by the time he was done talking. He also mentioned, casually, the way you mentioned the weather, that if I ever decided to put the house in both our names, just for estate planning purposes, it would make things cleaner down the road. He used words like avoid probate and joint tenancy and easier for Suzanne. He said he'd already talked to someone about it. I told him I'd think about it. I thought about it for 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, Suzanne called me every few days. She talked about how lonely she imagined I must be, how the house I was living in had too many stairs for a man my age, how it would mean so much to her to have me close. She never mentioned the deed. She never brought up ownership, but looking back, I can see now that it was a coordinated effort. Craig working one angle, Suzanne working another, both of them patient as fishermen. I moved in. I did not put Craig's name on the deed. I want to be very clear about that. Something in me, some quiet instinct that I didn't fully understand at the time, said no. I told Craig I wasn't ready to make any legal changes yet. He smiled and said, of course, there was no rush, whatever I was comfortable with. But his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and I noticed. The first year was manageable. I had my own room. I kept mostly to myself. I helped out where I could. I'd mow the lawn, fix things that needed fixing, occasionally cook. I paid the property taxes out of my own account. I kept the utilities in my name. I was not a burden. I was, in my estimation, a reasonable and low-maintenance man living quietly in a house that belonged to him. But Craig had a plan, and plans take time. It started with small things. He began referring to our house in conversations with other people. Neighbors, his friends, people at church. At first I let it go. Language is loose. People say things. Then he started making decisions about the property without consulting me. He had a fence taken down in the backyard, said it was an eyesore. He repainted the trim on the windows without asking. He had a tree removed that I had specifically said I wanted to keep, because Roberta had once admired how it looked in autumn. When I brought these things up, he'd listen, nod, apologize mildly, and then continue doing exactly what he wanted. He had a talent for making your objections feel small without ever directly dismissing them. Then he started in on Suzanne. I don't know exactly what he said to her in private. I only know the results. My daughter, the girl who alphabetized her bookshelf, started looking at me differently, a little cooler, a little more impatient. She started repeating things to me that sounded like Craig's phrasing. Dad, maybe you should let Craig handle the contractor. Dad, Craig knows what he's doing with property. Dad, you're not as sharp about these things as you used to be. That last one, that one landed. Because I knew what it meant. I had seen it happen to other men, other fathers. You get older, and the people around you start trying to redefine you, to establish a narrative that you're declining, that you need to be managed, that your judgment can no longer be trusted. It's quiet. It's incremental. And by the time you realize what's happening, the people around you already believe the story. I started keeping records. Nothing dramatic. I bought a small notebook, the kind with the black and white marbled cover, and I started writing things down. Dates, conversations. Decisions Craig made about my property without my knowledge. Payments I made. I wasn't sure why I was doing it at the time. I just felt the way you feel before a storm when you're not sure the storm is actually coming, but you close the windows anyway. About 18 months into the living arrangement, Craig presented me with a document. He called it a family trust agreement. He said he'd had a lawyer draw it up. For my benefit, he said, for tax purposes, for Suzanne's protection in case anything happened to me. The document, as best I could understand it without my glasses and without a lawyer of my own present, appeared to transfer management of the property and several decisions about it into a structure that gave Craig significant authority. I said I needed to read it more carefully. He said that was fine. Take all the time I needed. I took it to a lawyer named Brenda Patterson, whose office was on North High Street, and I paid her $250 for an hour of her time. She read the document. She took off her own glasses. She looked at me and said, "Mr. Merst, Odom, do not sign this." She explained what the document actually said, which was different in several important ways from what Craig had told me it said. The trust structure would give Craig de facto control over the property during my lifetime under certain conditions that were vague enough to be invoked for almost any reason. Combined with a clause about incapacity determination, it could potentially be used to argue that I was unfit to make decisions and transfer management entirely to him. She said, "This is not an estate planning document. This is a control document." I drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. The elm tree that Craig had wanted to remove was still there. I had held the line on that one. And the afternoon light was coming through it the way Roberta used to love. I thought about my late wife. I thought about her mother, Agnes. I thought about 31 years of getting up before dawn to go to work, of paying every bill on time, of doing things the right way. And then I went inside and I told Craig I would not be signing the document. The house changed after that. Not right away, but the temperature dropped. Craig became formal with me in the way that's worse than being rude, polite but distant, like I was a tenant he had to tolerate. Suzanne followed his lead. Dinners got quieter. My opinion stopped being asked for. I started eating alone most evenings, which suited me fine, but also told me something important about where things were headed. About 3 months later, Craig came to me with what he said was a lease agreement. He told me that since I was living in the house and using the utilities in the space, it was only fair that I contribute financially to the household. The amount he proposed was $1,400 a month. I reminded him that I owned the house. He said that may be technically true, but that he and Suzanne were the ones maintaining it day to day, and that my presence created costs, and that this was a reasonable arrangement for everyone. I said no. A week after that, Suzanne sat down with me at the kitchen table. Craig was conspicuously absent, and she told me, with tears in her eyes, that she thought it might be best if I found my own place to live. She said the situation had become too complicated. She said Craig was stressed and that she had to prioritize her marriage. She said she was sorry. I asked her, did she understand that this was my house? She said, "Dad, maybe it's just time to let it go." I want to pause here, because that sentence, "maybe it's just time to let it go," is the one that I have turned over in my hands 100 times since. My daughter, the girl I held when she was 4 hours old, telling me to let go of the only thing her grandmother left behind. I didn't argue. I told her I heard her and I would make arrangements. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the morning after Craig presented me with the trust document, I had called my nephew, a man named Dennis who works in property law up in Akron, and I had started a process, a quiet one. I had also, in the weeks that followed, opened a separate bank account at a different institution and begun moving my assets. Slowly, nothing dramatic, nothing that looked sudden, into accounts that Craig had no knowledge of or access to. I had also made an appointment to update my will. I also kept that marbled notebook. The morning Suzanne told me to leave, I said I would need 2 weeks to make arrangements. She said that was fine. She seemed relieved that I hadn't made a scene. Over the next 2 weeks, I organized my important documents, met twice more with Dennis, had one additional meeting with Brenda Patterson, and quietly arranged to rent a small apartment in a senior community about 12 minutes from the house. A 1-bedroom with a nice view of a courtyard. It cost me $700 a month. On the day I was supposed to leave, I packed my things into my car. Clothing, personal items, the framed photograph of Roberta from our 25th anniversary, my Bible, my tools. I didn't take much. The furniture, the appliances, the rugs, all of that I left. I was not going to be petty about the material things. Craig carried a cardboard box to the porch, my remaining books, some kitchen items of mine, a few other odds and ends that Suzanne had collected from around the house and put in the box for me. He set it down, let it fall, really, that hollow thud, and stood there. He said, "I hope there are no hard feelings." I looked at him for a moment. I said, "Take care of my daughter," and I picked up my box and I left. Now, here is what Craig did not know. He did not know that 3 weeks earlier, Dennis had helped me file paperwork to establish a revocable living trust, a real one, properly structured, that placed the Westerville house into a trust with clear terms, with me as the grantor and trustee during my lifetime, and with a charitable organization as the remainder beneficiary. Not Craig, not Suzanne, under the current terms. He did not know that I had documented in that marbled notebook 37 specific instances over 18 months of Craig making unauthorized decisions about my property, including the fence, the tree removal, and 2 instances where he had represented to contractors that he was the owner of the house. He did not know that 2 of those contractors had signed written statements confirming what Craig had said to them. He did not know that the trust document he had tried to get me to sign had been reviewed by Brenda Patterson, and that her written legal analysis was sitting in a file folder in Dennis's office. He did not know that I had reported Craig's conduct to the Ohio Adult Protective Services Office and that an investigation had been opened. In Ohio, financial exploitation of an elderly person is a serious matter. The threshold is 60 years old. I was 67, and he did not know. This is the part I still have to take a breath before I say, he did not know that 18 months earlier, before I even moved into that house, I had opened a CD account at a credit union in my name only. I had deposited into that account the proceeds from selling my old ranch house, the one I'd owned for 20 years, which I had quietly listed and sold while Craig and Suzanne were under the impression I was considering my options. That account had grown. Between the sale of my house, 30 years of careful saving, and Roberta's remaining life insurance money, the total in accounts that Craig had never laid eyes on was $431,000. $431,000. He had spent 18 months trying to position himself to take a house worth $480,000, not knowing that I had already quietly secured nearly that same amount in liquid assets he could not touch. 4 months after I moved out, a letter arrived for Craig from the Ohio Attorney General's office. Dennis had helped me connect with the right channels. The investigation had progressed. What began as an Adult Protective Services report had grown, because Craig, it turned out, had done this before. Not with a father-in-law, with his own elderly uncle, years earlier, in a different county. There was a pattern. Prosecutors take patterns seriously. Craig was ultimately charged with attempted financial exploitation of an elderly adult, and with filing a fraudulent document. The trust agreement, he had told me, was prepared by a lawyer turned out to have been drafted by Craig himself, using a template, with some professional-sounding language added. There was no lawyer. He had fabricated that entirely. He pleaded guilty to a reduced charge. He was sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation, required to pay restitution, and ordered to complete a financial ethics course. He did not go to prison, and I'll be honest with you, I wish the consequences had been heavier. But the system worked the way the system works, and at least there was a record now. At least the next elderly person he set his sights on would have something to find if they went looking. Suzanne called me 6 weeks after Craig's guilty plea. She cried. She said she hadn't known. I believe her, mostly. I think she knew something was wrong and chose not to look at it directly, which is different from not knowing, but it is also not the same as being in on it. She's my daughter. I know her. She is not a bad person. She married one, and she let him talk her into things she should have pushed back against, and she will have to live with that. We are not where we were. I don't know if we ever will be, but we talk on the phone on Sundays, and last month she drove out and we sat in the courtyard of my apartment building and drank coffee and watched a cardinal sit on the bird bath for an embarrassingly long time. Neither of us brought up Craig. Neither of us brought up the house. We just sat there, two people who share blood and history and grief and a long road back to each other, watching a bird. I still own the Westerville house. It's currently rented to a retired schoolteacher named Edna and her husband, who pays on time and never calls with complaints. The rent goes into my account. The house is in the trust. It will go to the Roberta Odom Memorial Scholarship Fund at Columbus State Community College when I'm gone. Something I set up in my wife's name because she never got to finish her degree and always wanted to. Craig didn't get the house. He didn't get any of it. In that marbled notebook, I still have it. It sits in the drawer of my nightstand next to Roberta's photograph. I don't open it much anymore. But I know it's there. Here's what I want you to take from this, and I'm talking specifically to anyone out there who is older, who has children or children-in-law who are circling around what you've built, who feel that slow chill in the house and aren't sure if they're imagining it. You are not imagining it. Write things down. Get your own lawyer, not one recommended by the person you're worried about. Talk to someone you trust who has nothing to gain from your decisions. Understand what you own and what your rights are, and do not let anyone, no matter how much you love them or how much they say they love you, convince you that your judgment is failing just because it's inconvenient for them. I am 67 years old. My knees are bad and my right ear rings sometimes, and I ate dinner at 5:30 because that's just where I am in life. But I am not confused. I am not diminished. I am a man who worked for everything he had and protected it when he needed to. And I am sitting in a courtyard watching cardinals and drinking decent coffee, and that is enough. That is more than enough. If this story helped even one person today, then it was worth telling. And if you're going through something similar right now, if you're in that house and you feel that chill, know that there is a way through. It is slow, and it requires patience, and it is not always satisfying. But there is a way through. Take care of yourselves, and take care of your paperwork. I've had a lot of time to sit with this story, and the thing that keeps coming back to me isn't the money, and it isn't Craig, and it isn't even the house. It's a simpler question. How does a man protect himself from people he loves? I don't have a clean answer, but I've come to believe that what happened to me wasn't random. It followed a pattern, not a mystical one, not fate or luck, just the ordinary pattern of choices stacking on top of each other until they become consequences. Craig made 100 small choices to treat an old man's trust as a resource to be extracted. Suzanne made 100 small choices to look away, and I made choices too, some that protected me, some that almost didn't. The notebook was a choice. Calling Dennis was a choice. Sitting across from Brenda Patterson and paying her $250 for honest counsel, that was a choice. None of those choices felt dramatic at the time. They felt like small, quiet acts of a man who wasn't sure he was even right to be worried. But they accumulated, and when they needed to matter, they did. That's what I want people to understand. Protecting yourself isn't one heroic moment. It's a series of undramatic decisions made when you're uncertain and tired and maybe a little ashamed to admit that the people in your house don't have your best interests at heart. The shame is the part nobody talks about. There's a particular kind of humiliation in realizing that someone you welcomed into your family was studying you. Your age, your assets, your vulnerabilities, the way a contractor studies a building before he starts taking it apart. I was not a foolish man. I was a trusting one. And trust, extended without discernment, is not a virtue. It's an exposure. I learned that at 67. I wish I had learned it cheaper. What I want to say to anyone watching who is in that house right now, who feels that chill, who is being told their memory is slipping, or their judgment is off, or that they should just let someone else handle the paperwork, is this: your instincts are not failing. When something feels wrong, it is usually because something is wrong. The people who benefit from your confusion will always have a reasonable-sounding explanation for why you shouldn't trust yourself. Don't hand them that power. Get a lawyer of your own choosing. Write things down. Know what you own. and understand that intelligence at any age is not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being honest enough with yourself to ask the right questions even when the answers are uncomfortable. Craig did not win because he was clever. He lost because I was patient. Patience is a form of strength that doesn't look like strength until it's over. I'm 67 years old. I drink my coffee in a courtyard every morning, and I watch birds, and I sleep without dread. That is what it cost Craig everything to try to take from me, and what it cost me everything to keep. It was worth it.